we find ourselves. Let's talk to William Clouston, leader of the Social Democrat Party, to see where he thinks it's all going. William, a very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
There is a sense of this kind of overbearing boredom that we're all going through at the moment, either because of COVID, or either because of Brexit, or either because of Christmas. You know, everything seems to just drag on and on and on. Could it be that this is their policy?
Yeah, there's a sort of water torture aspect to this from the EU's point of view. That's true. I just think it is actually very important we get this final stage right. And as a party, we advocate a WTO solution. I don't think anything on the table from what you read from the EU is worth signing up to. Level playing field, no, that's just a way of the EU controlling us, controlling our industrial policy going forward. That can't be acceptable. Their position on fisheries and coastal state is ridiculous. And frankly, I think a lot of commentators are failing to look at the benefits of a WTO solution with a little bit of trade friction. In the sort of narrative, ever since the Brexit vote happened in 2016, there's been a preoccupation with trade deals and with this idea that you can't sell into the single market unless you're a member of the EU. I mean, Anna Soubry was on record at one stage saying that if we leave the EU, our exports will go to zero. Preposterous. Yeah. Actually, what we're arguing for is a change to a softer globalism, a more domestic focus in our policy, and to start being less indifferent to what is made where and by whom.
So you would take the view that that you don't necessarily have to promote British goods as such, or British manufacturing, but you can in fact just encourage people to buy from wherever.
No, I think we would encourage British manufacturing. I think one of the problems, again, I mean, you spoke to John Rentoul yesterday, and you were discussing what the benefits from his point of view, because he's a Remainer, what the benefits of EU membership were, and the best he could come up with was that it stops a little bit of form filling at the border. Well, he's got to do better than that. Look at what the model. I'm not just talking about the EU, but I'm talking about our global trade policy model has done to, say, economies like the United States and Britain over the last 30 years. It's gutted industry, it's created permanent trade deficits, and it's beggared our consumers, because as a motor of growth, when people had high wages, when the factories were open and we were more productive, you relied on your consumer earning well and spending well. If you undermine that, if you hollow that out, which is basically what we've done, you get yourself into a situation where the only consumer spending that can take place is off debt. And look at the figures. Something like 63% of corporate profits in the UK are derived from either government debt or household debt. Well, that's not sustainable. And I would argue, I know, we're probably the only party arguing for this, but I want to see a pretty radical change from the existing pattern of not caring where things are made. I think we need to get industrial capacity up. Mike, manufacturing industry now in this country is only 10%, 11%.
Right.
It's pathetic.
Well, we're told, aren't we, and we have been told since the sort of Tony Blair era, that we are leaders in world financial services. And I think most people walking around in the streets of this country would say, actually, I'm not really sure what that is. What is world financial services, and what does it mean? Does it mean we've got loads of people working here from bigger corporate American merchant banks, taking loads and loads of money out of our economy and then taking it all back to America? What does it actually mean? But how do you get manufacturing back, William, when we've sort of allowed it to disappear to places like China, India, other parts of the world?
Well, let's just examine that. So, one of the examples I use is something you'll be aware of, which is and I'm using the United States as an example, but it applies to here because we've got the same policy basically. So if you go to Penn Station, you get the train from New York down to Philly. You will see it's 90 miles or something like that, and you've got wetlands and you've got suburbia and all sorts of other things. But you've got acres and acres of burnt out, basically gutted factories, which are now closed and are full of graffiti. And any society should be ashamed of that, actually. But what the cause of that, the real cause of that, is an indifference by those who govern us to what we make. What they've done is opened it up to China and to the lowest producer, the lowest cost producer globally to take all the business. And in the States, the result is unemployment, the mining out of the industrial wage. The industrial wage used to be the foundation of the family. You know, and you dismantle that, and you effectively dismantle the, family life as well. I think there's been far too much indifference. A lot of this is caused by the ideology that a lot of politicians on the right, and even people like Tony Blair, who economically was pretty much on the right, of just being indifferent to it, saying leave it to the market. Well, if you leave it to the market entirely, you'll end up with one large factory making all the shoes in the world in China. By the way, under near slave conditions.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it's not really a free market if you're competing with a country which can afford to pay its workers barely any money at all and control them in such a way as it's not really in any way, economically viable in any other place.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not fair competition, and it's highly exploitative. And again, we're not caring about the conditions under which those workers are working. But strategically, I mean, we have a whole generation of politicians that have been terrified of any trade friction. Personally, I would go for some trade friction. I want a WTO solution precisely because it does give a little bit of protection to domestic producers. I know it's heresy to say this on the radio, but it would give a little bit of protection to domestic producers. And by the way, we'd also collect about 12 billion in tariffs.
Yeah. Well, interesting, isn't it, though, that during the whole kind of, at the height of the Brexit debate, I suppose you might call it that, when people were shouting through megaphones down in Westminster, you would always hear the Remainer argument, which was, you can't point to any place in the world that operates on WTO rules which would be in any way viable for us. Is that true?
That's not true at all. I mean, it's nonsense. You could only want... We live in a country, as I say, where manufacturing's down at 10%. Imports are over 30% of GDP. The difference to the economy, if the Bank of England and the Trade Department and everyone else was mandated to narrow those gaps, would be huge. I mean, you need to get manufacturing up to about 18%, and you need imports down to something like 25%. Now, that can be done, but I would remind people that you cannot do it unless you take control of your own policy, your own industrial policy, create some special industrial zones, create some trade friction, and get some of these industries back. I mean, fishing is quite a nice example.
Yeah.
Where, for as long as you stay in the EU, you can't control your fishing waters. I mean, do we want a fishing fleet in our own waters or not? Well, I think we fish something like 40% of the catch. And I'd accept in the talks. I would accept, obviously. We don't have the capacity to fish it now. So
yeah, but we don't have the capacity to fish it because we gave it all away to the French and the Spanish, and so it's a kind of it's a mighty, I think, national episode of self-harm that was started in the early 70s with Ted Heath, who said, well, actually, we don't really eat as much fish as you lot do, so why don't you just take it all away? And to then say, yeah, well, now we haven't got much of an industry. Well, guess what? That's exactly what happens, isn't it?
But that's because of the indifference, Mike. And again, I'm going to point the finger at the sort of globalist, liberal, free trade purists who literally think it doesn't matter if you produce anything. That's the rhetoric we've had, and a whole generation of conservative politicians and New Labour think this. And I'm afraid, honestly, we're at the end of this road. The pandemic actually exposed the folly of this, where the country was reduced to near beggary to get basic supplies. And the whole idea that you would have a series of strategic industries which you'd actually protect and care for and make sure. I mean, the fact is, Mike, other countries do this. Go to South Korea and have a look at their corporations. And their government and corporations wouldn't dream of selling off their very best industrial assets.
Right.
In this country, we've had for years, absolutely years, it's Rowntree's, it's Cadbury's, it's the whole of British industry is for sale, and it's because we're completely indifferent to it. But
surely the European Union has played its role in that, hasn't it? Because we have for so long been told by our masters, supposedly political masters, I use that very advisedly, by the way, because I don't see them like that at all. But we've been more or less told that we're not really supposed to be patriotic. We're not really meant to be nationalistic. We're not really meant to be jingoistic, because that's all wrong. And what we should be doing instead is supporting this great economic and social endeavour known as the European Union, for which we should all be very proud to be a part.
Well, that's just a very good way of tying your hands behind your back so you can be hit hard, basically. I mean, it's very foolish. I mean, And you know, my political hero Peter Shaw saw this in the 70s. You've got to be able to act in the interests of your citizens. Now, fair enough. I mean, a lot of the corporations are run. The executives of the corporations are running the corporations for their own benefit. It's not just that they're overpaid, many of them. You know, and some of them, I think Ocado boss is getting £2,000 more than the average employee. Some of this is just obscene, but it's just that the decisions they've made in outsourcing factories. If you close a factory in Middlesbrough or Philly or whatever, and you outsource it, you harm that domestic economy a great deal. Now, it might make in the short term, it might give you some profits, but in the long term, you're headed for a permanent trade deficit. And again, I would just some very basic economics. If you permanently run trade deficits, I mean, you can only pay for imports in three ways. You can pay for imports by making something today which you sell, or selling something which you've made in the past or which you own, or by issuing debt. Now, that's a basic mathematical identity. That's just true. And year after year, our political class have said it doesn't matter that you have this great big trade deficit. We've got a 95 billion trade deficit with the EU, and I would argue that our most problematic trade partner is the EU. The sense of putting a little bit of trade friction between that. I mean, look at agricultural products. Do you really believe, Mike, that French agricultural products, whether it's cheese or wine or whatever, do you think that's the world price? Do you think we couldn't get equivalent products elsewhere if we wanted to?
Well, I'm sure we could. I mean, the fact is that there are certain things that were made exclusively by certain countries many years ago. But quite rightly now, lots of things can be made all over the place. I mean, we can make champagne in this country. Can't call it champagne. But some of the French companies are actually buying land in Kent in order to grow grapes because they think that's the future. So, you know, I'm more than happy to continue to buy whatever is offered to me if I like the price. I don't particularly wish to be put into a kind of a straitjacket in terms of trade by any government, whether it's our own or somebody else's.
Yeah, you need to be. The key word is unfettered. The government needs to act, and actually corporations need to get with this as well and start acting in the national interest. The interest of the corporation isn't always the national interest. No. I think that's something that we need to.
Would you offer tax incentives then, say for example, to a company that wanted to come into this country and start up a fishing fleet, for example? Because I sort of have quite a lot of faith in the fishing industry, as it were, because the one thing that we know there are in the sea is fish. So we might as well fish them out as opposed to letting somebody else do it. But in order to do that properly, we need somebody to invest in the business, buy a load of boats, and hire a load of people.
Yeah, that can be done quite easily. But the prerequisite is that you control your own fishing waters. Yeah. I mean, that's. There's not a shortage of capital, Mike. I mean, there's plenty of capital. In fact, the global savings. I mean, there's a glut of capital. It's the question is to what productive use you can put that capital. So no, I mean it's a matter of will. What we're fighting against as a party, and in the SDP, we're fighting against this indifference. People, our political class, have been indifferent to these things, and it should matter. Yes. You know, it really, really should matter whether we have our own domestic fishing fleet. I mean, and so it's no problem at all. To be fair to, in terms of the talks, what you can't do is tomorrow or on the 1st of January suddenly say, well, get out of the waters, because we don't actually have the capacity to do it at the moment. But no, there's no, in terms of raising capital to buy that infrastructure and to get it back up and running, it's there. Right.
Well, it just seems like an obvious one to go for, because at the moment, if you want to suddenly boost manufacturing, there's some right old-fashioned manufacturing going on there of the fish business, which has been allowed to be in decline for so many years, which you could then fix.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you want is a rejig in the way we think as well, and I'm very encouraged. There's a lot of younger people get this, and actually there is a link to the environmental movement. I think you can only do what you can do domestically, but the sort of economic model that we've had, Mike, of your chest of drawers being full of 50 cheap T-shirts, I mean that's over. You'd be better off having 5 good ones, and I think a lot of people understand that.
Well, how about if you're over a certain age, you don't wear T-shirts anymore?
Old shirts, then yeah, whatever, yeah. But you get my point. I mean, the point is that I think we need to value what we buy more, and we need to buy less off debt and more, and we need to produce more domestically. And it can be done. You've just got to want to do it. And I see the pandemic actually, I think, will be one of these turning points in history where it really shouldn't, it won't be the same again, and it shouldn't be. And as I say, your conversation with John Rentoul yesterday, I mean, the best he could come up with is that, you might not have to fill any forms. If he's missing the point, I mean, he's a nice guy, but he's not paying attention, because what you need to do is to change the entire system. Basically, you need to have a softer form of globalism, a form of globalism that lets you make your own social and economic bargains, and actually occasionally put your own citizens first.
And you segued nicely into the pandemic there, because my final question to you is about Christmas. I mean, when did you ever think that you would be told whether or not you could have Christmas by your Prime Minister?
Yeah, or his experts. Yeah, no, it's what can I say? We talked about this so much. What they don't grasp is that they've already told people what the rules are. So they've already said, these are the rules, these are the days that you can come and celebrate Christmas. And people in the real world, not in sort of, Westminster world, but in the real world, people have booked their time off from their factories and workplaces. Yeah. And they've booked trains and sometimes planes and other things. And they've made the arrangements. You can't suddenly say, by the way, you're not going to do it. Right. But to return to it, Mike, point I've made many times, if the government asks the public to do something reasonable, they will probably do it. If they ask for something unreasonable, you will get public defiance. And I'm afraid I would never advocate people openly, disobeying the law. But frankly, we're getting to the stage where people, decent citizens, are just going to have to make their own arrangements, I'm afraid.
Absolutely right. And the inconsistency of the rules, I think, is what bothers most people as well. William, delightful to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. If we don't see you before Christmas, we'll see you afterwards. Hopefully you'll have a good one with however many members of however many households the laws require you to be able